All right, we're going to Jeremiah chapter 10. And what I want you to do, I want you to go to Jeremiah chapter 10, and I want you to stay there. And if we go to a different verse, which we're going to do for a text, I want you to go there and keep your place here. And we're going to come back and go through that chapter. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it's an interesting chapter, because it goes back and forth between comparing idols with God, and like the wicked and the just and all of that. And so I thought it would be interesting to go through and see that division. And we're going to read all the verses and just make a few comments on each one. So there's a lot of verses there. There's like 25 verses. And we'll read them, but we're not going to say a whole lot about them. We'll stop one or two of them for a while. But we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, if you'll keep your place there. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and we're going to read verse 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse number 7. It's an interesting verse. It says, "For who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou hadst not received it?" And so my message tonight is making a difference. There's a difference between an idol and God. There's a difference between the wicked and the righteous. See? And we're going to see that difference. And this verse tells us what makes the difference. And if you just want it in a nutshell, it's the grace of God. Because we received everything from God. Everything we have, we received it from God. And so we need to give God all the glory. And so if you go back now to Jeremiah chapter 10, we'll start with verse 1 in just a moment. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here tonight. We pray, Lord, that you will bless us as we go through this chapter. Help us, Lord, to be interested in it. And I know most of us know all this stuff, but it's a good reminder, and it's a good to look into a book and see it once again. We ask you to bless it to our hearts. Bless the ones that need you in a special way, and forgive us of our sins in Jesus' name. Amen. First of all, verse 1 and part of verse 2. Learn not the way of the heathen. So he gets a good start here, doesn't he? Learn not the way of the heathen. Look at verse 1. Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you. Boy, we could put that on a sign and put it on our wall, couldn't we? Because that's what we need to do, is listen to the Lord and hearken to his word. O house of Israel, now verse 2 and the first part says, Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen. Now I want you to concentrate on that word, learn. You know, when babies are born, they don't know the way of the heathen. They don't know much about sin. You know, they don't know how to sin. So they have to be taught to sin. That means they have to learn to sin. Now partly their depravity helps them to learn, because they're sort of bent towards sin. The old theologians used to say you're bent towards sin, and you are, and toward the world. But the heathen are always willing to teach the children. If we don't teach the children the Bible, the world will teach them the world. And if we don't teach them about God, the world will teach them about another God. And so that's what this is mainly all about. So that makes the way to idols a lot easier when we know that a child is born, it's depraved and bent towards sin, and that the world is more than willing to teach that child the wrong way. And that's why Christian parents, we have to do our best to be teachers of our children. Deuteronomy chapter 6, Moses said, teach your children, bring them up in the way of the Lord. Now, the second part of verse 2, down to verse 5, we have the character of the heathen. In verse 2b, down to verse 5, we notice there, it says, they are afraid of the heavens. It says, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. I was reading some things that some different people had written on Facebook. I go through there every day for, 30 minutes or so, and try to get as much as I can. Most of it lately is, fortunately, has not been somebody died or somebody had a heart attack or something. And so there was this boy named, I don't know him, his name is Lucian Lesage. Do you know who that is at all? You know, somebody like that? Anyway, he said this, and I copied it down. He says, lost men love to talk about the glory of Mother Nature. the planets and the stars and the galaxies and worship it as a god, and he calls that pantheism, which it is. He says, pictures from the Hubble telescope take men's breath away. Did you ever notice how that when something's happening in space, that the whole world stops and looks up into space? They wonder at all of that, And then he has another paragraph. He says, but then I read in Psalm, the Lord is high above all nations, and his glory above the heavens. Psalm 113 verse 4. I had to look up the passages. He said, let them praise the name of the Lord, for his name alone is excellent. His glory is above the earth and heaven. Psalm 138 verse 14. And so people get amazed at the stars, but they don't realize there's something beyond the stars. There's something greater than the stars. There's something more, what should we say, dynamic, more eternal, more powerful, more sovereign than those things. But you know, the heathen, they like to make gods out of them. And that's why I have these slides. I want to just show you real quick. It won't take long. In Babylon, they had quite a few gods. They had all kinds of gods, actually. They had a sun god named Utu. Next time you see the sun, look up and say, hello, Utu. You know, of course, that wouldn't be right because you'd be talking to a god. And he's a pretty little thing, see there? And then the moon god, Kisnugal or something like that. You pronounce it any way you like. This is the moon god. You can see the little crescent moon there. And then we have Mars, Nergal. There's the god of Mars. And, of course, you know our days of the week are named after these gods and all of that, you know. And then we have the Mercury god, Nabu. And he's a pretty little thing, too. And they made him. They built him. You see, that's what's the difference about it. Then we have the Jupiter god. It's called Marduk. I thought that was a dog's name. But Jupiter's named Marduk. And then we have Venus, which is Inanna. And I don't have any idea what that is. I think it's a she, maybe. I don't know. Hold it in her hand, something like that. And then we have Saturn, Ninurta. And he's a big old fancy guy, isn't he? And these are the gods of the Babylonians. And so what God is saying, you know, these gods of the Babylonians and other nations around, the heathen, the word heathen is the same word as nations in the Bible. And so they're copying their gods and making gods for Israel out of those gods and mimicking their rites, R-I-T-E-S, their customs and all of that kind of thing, and worshiping these other gods. And so they're afraid of the heavens. Secondly, their customs are vain. Look at verse 3, the first part of verse 3. For the customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest. In other words, he's got God on his mind. He's going to build a god. He's going to make a god, so he goes out and cuts down a tree. Now how stupid is that? I'm going to make me a god, so I'm going to go out and cut down a tree. It's almost as bad as that guy that was trying to sell cigarettes, according to the comedian that was telling it, from here to some other country. I forgot what country it was, and he was talking about selling tobacco and cigarettes, you know, and he said, well, what do you do with them? He said, well, you put them in your mouth. I said, oh, you put them in your mouth? Yeah, I put them in your mouth. Well, then what do? Well, you set it on fire. What? You set it on fire? I don't think he sold very many cigarettes. Put something in your mouth and set it on fire. But that's about how crazy it is to go out and cut down a tree to make a god. And then, the last part of verse 3, down through verse 5, their work is in vain. Not only their customs are in vain, because there were all kinds of customs that went along with these gods, and you had to learn all of that. So you have to learn to be a heathen. And so it says in verse 3, the work of the hands of the workman with an axe. Now that doesn't just mean he goes out and cuts down a tree. That's talking about, have you seen this art that these people do? They'll cut down a tree and they'll form something like a squirrel or a man, or like I saw one that was an Indian, and he did it all with a chainsaw. And he cut that out, and the Indian is like he's sitting in the tree. And it's perfect. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And that's why he's talking about the axe here. Not just cutting down a tree, but it's making a god out of that tree. Verse 4, they deck it with silver and with gold. They either overlay it with gold, or they put gold on it, you know, or I don't know, maybe make the face gold or silver. And they fasten it with nails, with hammers, that it move not. They put it on a pedestal, or they put it somewhere where it'll sit up by itself and stand up like a palm tree. Look at verse 5. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. So this has to be like a person, but they don't speak. See this guy up here on the picture? He doesn't speak. He can't speak. He's an idol. So they're upright as the palm tree. They speak not. They must needs be borne. Now you know that word, B-O-R-N-E. It means they need to be carried. This God can't even go anywhere. He has to stay right where you put him. And they put him there and nail him down so the wind won't blow him over and make him a god, and he can't go anywhere. See? And he says here, be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Now, that's wonderful about an idol. It can't do anything evil. But then it goes on and says, neither also is it in them to do good. Can't do anything. You can't do bad and you can't do good. I can just imagine these people, looking at this God, wondering what it can do. And it can't do either. It can't do evil, it can't do good. It can't do it, it can't speak, can't hear, can't talk, nothing. And then we're going to switch now from the idols to God. That's what this chapter does, back and forth. Look at verse 6 and 7. There's none like the Lord. See, after we talked all about that and described them and everything, there's none like the Lord. Verse 6, for as much as there is none like unto thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. Who would not fear thee, O God of nations? For to thee doth it appertain. For as much as among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there is none like thee. None like thee. In 1 Samuel, I was reading that today in chapter 12, that they were having a little problem with identifying God, who he was and all that. And Samuel talked to God, and God brought thunder and rain. It must have been a terrible rainstorm because it scared those people to death. Because God does something. He doesn't just sit there and do nothing. He does something. When Samuel asked the Lord to bring thunder, he did, and he brought a great rain. And it was a terrible thing. But then verse 8 and 9 goes back. It says, the heathen are brutish and foolish. And that's what it says in verse 8. The first part says, but they are altogether brutish and foolish. A brute is an animal-like being that can't think. They're stupid. And that's what the word brute means. And they're foolish. They can't reason. They don't come up with logic. They don't even understand logic. And so they're the lowest of the low. And so the heathen, he's not talking about the gods themselves, but the heathen themselves. It says the heathen are altogether brutish and foolish. And in the next part of verse 8, they have false doctrine. It says that the stock is a doctrine of vanities. The stock is either that part of the tree that they cut out to make the god, or sometimes they made a god out of the stump of the tree. And usually in the Bible, when it talks about the stock, it's talking about the trunk of a tree. So I'm sure that perhaps they put gold on the trunk of the tree and maybe shaped it into something, and that way they didn't have to put it on a pedestal. The root would hold it up, at least for a while. Not only that, but it goes on to say in verse 9 that they use a lot of rich things to make the god look nice and so forth. Look what it says in verse 9. Silver spread into plates is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the workman and of the hands of the founder. So they take the gold and they take the silver and they mash it down into plates, little flat plates. And estimation is that they probably form that into maybe around the face or around something on the body of the god, whatever they make. Because, there has to be some value to this thing. It can't just be a tree and wood. It has to be something. So the most precious things that the Bible people knew about was silver and gold. That's why Peter said, silver and gold, we have none. We don't have any silver and gold. Because it was an icon for riches. And so they wanted to put something rich on this god. Verse 9 goes on to say that they're beautiful. It said blue and purple is their clothing. They are all the work of cunning men. Some believe that maybe that had something to do with the homemade god. but most believe it was the ministers of that god. And I looked this up. This is the garb that some of the Babylonian priests would wear. I found that online, and I made a copy, or kept a copy of that. And you can see all the blue and the purple. And if you'll ever notice, the high churches, Catholicism, and a lot of the high churches, they use blue, and they use purple, blue and purple, and usually scarlet. Not red usually, but a scarlet. And see, that's what they have here. Same thing. Roman Catholicism loves those colors, and they use them a lot. And a lot of the high churches do that with the priests. Sometimes will put on garbs, of different things, and so they just want it to be beautiful. And so most people believe that would be the ministers, that would the priests that would serve this God in whatever they would do. Now, verse 10. He goes back to the Lord here now. The Lord is true and living. Now, see, we said that the idol can't talk, can't hear, can't walk, can't go anywhere, can't do good, can't do bad. But look at verse 10. But the Lord is the true God. And what makes him true? He's a living God. That makes him the true God. See, he's the living God and an everlasting King. At his wrath the earth shall tremble, and the nations shall not be able to abide his indignation. So here the prophet reaches into the future and predicts the coming of God's wrath on the earth, and the earth will tremble. The nations won't be able to abide or stand his indignation or his wrath. Now let me read to you Revelation 11:18, where it says, "And the nations were angry, and the wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them that destroy the earth." That's God's wrath. And so old Jeremiah, he's reaching clear out into the future now, and he's predicting that wrath that's going to come upon the earth. Now verse 11, he goes back to the heathen again. It says the heathen gods are not the creators. That little god you cut out of a tree? He didn't create anything. You created him. You're the creator. Verse 11, "Thus shalt you say unto them, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth, even they shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens." So these gods are going to perish because they're just earthly things. They're not heavenly things. And so they're not the creators. Maybe some of the people thought they were remember that when Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and when they eventually, made the golden calf, remember that? And they said, "These are the gods that brought us out of the land of Egypt." See? Well, it's like these gods created the world. These gods created everything. Not much different from evolution. They really don't call it creation, but the evolutionists think that evolution, the process of evolution, brought about what we would call the creation. It all just came from chance. It all just came by who knows what, but it just came. And that's just as idolatrous as these people are. And then verse 12 and 13, he says God is the creator. Look at verse 12. "He hath made the earth by his power." An idol didn't have any power. "He hath established the world by his wisdom. He has stretched out the heavens by his discretion. He hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom. He has stretched out the heavens by his discretion." I read that, didn't I? What did I do? Do that twice? Yeah, I wrote that down twice. Verse 13, when he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings and rain, bringeth forth the wind out of the treasures. Every time you feel the wind blowing or know it's blowing, you know that God's doing something. God's alive. He's the living God. He's actually doing something. Every time it rains, God's doing something. Every time it snows, we get mad at him, but he's doing stuff. We need to be thankful that God's doing stuff because he's a living God. And then verse 14 to 15, man's own gods have no life in them. Verse 14, every man is brutish in his knowledge. He's dumb, stupid. Now, dumb really means you can't speak, but to us, most of us, dumb means that you're brutish in knowledge. Every man is brutish in his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. He founded the graven image, but he's confounded by the image, and because he doesn't know where the image came from except from himself. And he's confused. People ask him questions. Where did that God come from? How long does he exist? How long will he live? What will he do for us? And he can't answer all those questions. He goes on to say, for his molten image is falsehood. A molten image would be one either that's melted, and put in a mold. Normally that's what it means, or it could mean graven, like shaped, but mostly molten, and some of those were pure gold. Verse 15, they are vanity and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation, they shall perish. In other words, when God shows up, they're going to be nothing. And when his final wrath shows up, they're going to disappear because everything will perish. Verse 16, God is not like the idols. Verse 16 says, the portion of Jacob. Now, when he says that, it's used several times in the Bible, he's talking about the Lord. The portion of Jacob is not like them. For he is the former of all things. Now, that word former doesn't mean before. It means the one who forms things. The former of all things. God formed everything. And Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. So God is the former of all things, and the rod of his inheritance is Israel. He's the Lord of hosts. And that means he's a Lord of a whole bunch of living things. A whole bunch of living things in heaven. I'm not sure how many different ones there are. I know there are cherubim and seraphim, and I know there are angels, and who knows what else are in heaven. But he's the Lord of all of them. He's the Lord of hosts, the Lord of all. Verse 17 and 18, God orders the people, now listen to this, he orders them to pack up. Verse 17, gather up thy wares out of the land, O inhabitant of the fortress. The fortress is Jerusalem. You might as well pack your suitcase because you're leaving. You're going, you're leaving, you're getting out. You can either go now, or the Chaldeans are going to come down and take you out. You're leaving one way or the other. Verse 18 says, for thus saith the Lord, behold, I will sling out the inhabitants of the land at this once, and will distress them, for they may find it, that they may find it so. In other words, you might as well get your suitcase ready and leave right now, because you're leaving. And you'll find that it's so when I sling you out. It's not just going to be you're going to walk out of town or ride your horse. No. You're going to be slung out. And the enemy does that. They come in and take them and lead them off to Chaldea. Verse 19 through 22, Jeremiah is hurt over all of this. Notice verse 19. He says, Jeremiah says, woe is me for my hurt. See, Jeremiah is all alone. He's the only one that's preaching the truth. All the other prophets are preaching false doctrine. Maybe not all of them, but if there's another one or two, it'd be the ones that we know, and they would be preaching the truth too. But he's hurt. He said, my wound is grievous. But I said, truly, this is a grief, and I must bear it. Yeah, because the Lord gave me this to bear. He could give up. He could join with the others, and he could complain, and he could worship the tree or whatever it is. No, but he said, I have to bear it. Verse 20, my tabernacle is spoiled. Most people believe that's Jerusalem or the temple. And all my cords are broken. Things that are keeping me straight, keeping me together. It's like his mind and his heart and all those things is broken. My children are gone forth of me, and they are not. There is none to stretch forth my tent anymore and to set up my curtains. Nobody to give me a place to stay or a place to live. My children are gone. I can't take care of my children. Everything's bad. So he's hurt. Verse 21, for the pastors are become brutish. I mean, even the Baptist preachers have become, I don't know there were any Baptists back then, but the Baptist preachers have even become brutish and have not sought the Lord. Therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered. So when these people, you talk about our flock scattering, I mean, that'll be a scattering. All of them are going to leave. Every one of them are going to leave. Verse 22, behold, the noise of the bruit is come. The bruit is a report that comes out of like somewhere, like somebody coming, like making a great announcement. The battle is on. The enemy is coming. They're on their way. They're on the horizon. And it's not going to be long until they'll be here. And they'll be destroying everything. That's the bruit. For the pastures are become, verse 22. Behold, the noise of the bruit is come, and a great commotion out of the north country. Perhaps they're actually hearing the horses coming. I mean, it's time. And people talk today about the signs of the times. And you look around you and you see all the stuff going on. And we ought to be able to look at it and say that the longer it goes, the closer we are to the coming of the Lord. Because the world's not going to get any better. Now, it might up and down. I mean, a country might get better one time and worse another time. But the world at large, it's not going to get better and better and better. So they heard the commotion. It says, to make the cities of Judah desolate and a den of dragons. When this sound of all these horses and chariots and all of this and the shouting and yelling and screaming of all the soldiers come in, when that happens, we're going to be desolate. That means empty. We're going to be empty. And a den of dragons, which is a wild beast, will be walking around rather than people. Now we know that there were some few people who stayed at Jerusalem. But they were very few and they were very poor. And they were taken care of in a reasonable kind of way. Now, I've named 23 to 25 the final lesson. And here's one of the lessons. First of all, the way of a man is not in himself. Boy, that's a good lesson. Verse 23, O Lord, I know that the way of a man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Well, I tell you, that's a strong verse. Lord, I can't do anything. If you don't do it, it's not going to be done. And Lord, if they come and take over Jerusalem and they destroy it and take all the people away, you're doing it. I can't do anything about it. See? And even our salvation, nothing we can do about it. It's all of God. Jonah found that out. And then only the Lord can correct us. Notice what he says in verse 24. O Lord, correct me. Make things straight for me, but with judgment. Not in thine anger, lest thou bring me to nothing. Lord, I've served you. I've preached the truth for you. I've carried this around. I've worried. I've done all of this. I've cried out to you. I've cried and mourned and wept. I've done all of this. But he said, and I need to be corrected. Every Christian needs to be corrected. We're not perfect. We all sin. God needs to correct us. So he says, correct me. But do it with judgment. Do it with proper judgment. Do it with righteous judgment. Maybe have a little mercy. I think that's what he's saying. Have a little mercy. Use your righteous judgment to correct me. Don't let me be like the rest of them in your horrible anger and bring me down to nothing. Verse 25, but his anger is with the wicked. It says, pour out thy fury upon the heathen. Don't let it pour out upon me, Lord, because I'm one of yours. I belong to you. You're my God. That tree is not my God. So he says, pour out thy fury upon the heathen that know thee not, and upon the families that call not on thy name. For they have eaten up Jacob, and devoured him, and consumed him, and have made his habitation desolate. And that's exactly what God did. He took Israel captive, and he used Chaldea, or Babylon, to do it, and it was a horrible, bloody mess. But then God punished Babylon for doing it. And that's what he's talking about. He said, you have anger on us. Let your anger come to the heathen. Let them have their portion of this too. Because it's not only Israel that's guilty. They got their ideas from the heathen. So don't forget the heathen. Punish them too. And that's exactly what he did. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to close by going back to the text tonight and just look at it again. 1 Corinthians 4:7. For who maketh thee to differ? from another. You see, the idols are different from God. They're dead, God's alive. They're weak, God is strong. Back and forth and back and forth. But he says, what makes thee to differ? What makes a person to differ? Well, either you're worshiping idols or you're worshiping God. If you're worshiping idols, you're different from the ones who are worshiping God. So if the idol is different from God, the idol worshiper is different from the God worshiper. So he says, who maketh thee to differ from another, and what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Can you brag about being a Christian? Can you brag about being God's child? No, because God's the one who did that. You received it from him. He says, now if thou didst receive it, which we did, why dost thou glory as if thou hast not received it? You know, there are people, and I believe this, theologically it's hard for me to believe, but I do believe it. I believe there are saved people that don't know that God did everything to save them. Now, I believe that they're saved by grace through faith, and I know that they believe that it's not by works, but they don't realize that from the very beginning, God had to do something initially to save them, and they don't understand it. They don't believe that. Prayerfully, if they study the Scriptures, they'll come to know that. But if you got something from God, you got it from him, you received it. And don't act as if you didn't receive it. Oh, I did this. I was smart enough to trust the Lord. And I did this, and I came to the Lord, and I quit this, well, you got to be careful. You'll be over in works if you're not careful, So what makes us to differ? Well, we know. Not that stupid idol that can't talk and can't hear and can't go anywhere, but it's God. He makes us to differ. Because everything we have, we receive from him. Isn't that wonderful? Let's stand together.